Welcome to Nightshift Horror. Before we check in tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now get comfortable. The night shift is about to begin.
Story 1. Handoff occurred at 1902. I was still in the parking garage when my phone lit up with the alert. Handoff notes complete. Review and sign. But I hadn't clocked in yet. My badge was still in my purse, my coffee still warm in the cup holder. I remember staring at that notification for longer than I should have, watching my reflection in the phone screen, thinking someone else must have logged in under my credentials. It happens. System glitches, duplicate accounts. But when I opened the chart 5 minutes later at the nurse's station, the notes described my shift in perfect detail. Room assignments I hadn't received yet. Patient updates I hadn't been briefed on. Assessment findings I hadn't observed. All of it accurate, all of it logged at 1902 hours, while I was still 3 floors below ground, trying to remember where I parked. My name is Rebecca Holt. I've worked medical surgical night shift at Providence General for 11 years. I know the rhythm of this unit the way some people know their childhood home. The hum of the med cart wheels on linoleum, the particular squeak of the supply room door, the way the overhead lights in the corridor flicker twice before stabilizing when someone microwaves food in the break room. Night shift has a language all its own. You learn to read the silences between call bells, the weight of footsteps approaching your station, the quality of a patient's breathing from 3 doors away. I arrived that evening the same way I always did, 17:45. Early enough to review charts, late enough that day shift was already wrapping up. The unit was transitioning, medication carts being restocked. Whiteboards updated. That particular energy of one shift handing reality over to another. Linda was the outgoing charge nurse. We'd overlapped hundreds of times. She met me at the station with her usual tired smile and a stack of printed reports. "Quiet day," she said. "Room 12 is post-op stable. Room 18 has a new admit coming up from emergency around 2100. Room 22 is comfort care only. Family's been in and out." I nodded, flipping through the pages, standard stuff. Nothing that required special attention. Linda logged out of the system and grabbed her bag. "You already signed off on handoff," she said. Saved me a step. I looked up. "What?" "Your notes. You completed the handoff documentation like 20 minutes ago. I was going to mention it, but figured you were just being efficient." She shrugged. "Anyway, have a good shift." She left before I could respond. I sat down at the workstation and pulled up the electronic health record. Sure enough, there was my name. Rebecca Holt, RN. Handoff received and acknowledged at 1902 hours. I scrolled through the entries. They were detailed, more detailed than Linda's verbal report. Patient in room 12 showed mild tachycardia at 1800 hours, resolved with repositioning. Patient in room 18 had a history of medication non-compliance, required close monitoring. Room 22's family had requested pastoral care at 1915. I hadn't written any of it. I checked the timestamp again, 1902. I'd been in the parking garage. I pulled up my badge access log. Sure enough, my first entry was at the employee entrance at 1906, 4 minutes after the handoff notes were filed. I told myself it was a clerical error. Someone entered the wrong user ID. It had happened before. Last year, a pharmacy tech accidentally logged prescriptions under my license number for an entire weekend. Took 3 weeks and 2 meetings with administration to sort out. I made a note to email IT in the morning and moved on. The shift proceeded normally. Room 12's post-op patient needed an extra dose of pain medication around 2200 hours. The new admit arrived from emergency at 21:30, half an hour earlier than expected. A fall at home. Possible hip fracture. Alert and oriented vitals stable. Room 22's family left around midnight. The patient's breathing was shallow but steady. I checked on them every 30 minutes just to be sure. Around 0200 hours, I sat down to document my assessments. I opened the charting module and found that most of my entries were already completed. Patient in room 12 repositioned at 2215 for comfort. Pain level reassessed, reported 3 out of 10. Patient in room 18 assisted to bathroom at 2300 hours. Steady gait, no assistance required. Room 22 vitals recorded at 0100 hours. Respirations 12 per minute. Oxygen saturation 92% on 2 liters. Every single entry was accurate. I hadn't written any of them. I scrolled through the activity log. All entries were attributed to me. Rebecca Holt, RN. Timestamps matched my rounds almost exactly. A few were a minute or two off, but the content was correct. The observations, the interventions, the outcomes. Everything I would have written for me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had documented earlier and forgotten. Nightshift does strange things to memory. Hours blur together. You can finish a task and have no recollection of starting it. But I would have remembered sitting down at the computer. I would have remembered typing. I deleted one of the entries, a note about room 18's bathroom assistance. I rewrote it with slightly different wording and saved it. Then I refreshed the page. The original entry was back, word for word. My rewrite was gone. I tried again with a different note. Same result. The system restored the original version within seconds. No error message, no warning. Just a quiet reversion, as if my changes had never existed. I walked to the break room and made a cup of coffee I didn't drink. When I came back, there were new entries. Patient in room 12 requested extra blanket at 0240. Provided. Patient resting comfortably. Room 22, patient's respiratory rate decreasing. Family notified per care plan. I hadn't notified anyone. I hadn't been in room 22 for 20 minutes. I picked up the phone and called the charge nurse on the adjacent unit. Greg had been working nights longer than I had. If anyone would know about a system update or documentation protocol change, it would be him. Hey, Rebecca, what's up? Are you having any issues with charting tonight? Like what? Entries appearing before you write them. Auto-population or something. There was a pause. No. Why? Is your system glitching? Maybe. It's probably nothing. Want me to call IT? No, I'll handle it, thanks. I hung up and stared at the screen. Another entry had appeared. Patient in room 18 reports mild nausea, offered antiemetic, declined, will monitor. I stood up and walked to room 18. The patient was asleep. I checked the call log. No recent activity. I went back to the desk. The entry was still there. Over the next 3 hours, the notes continued. They documented my rounds with unsettling precision. When I delayed checking on room 12 because I was tied up with a medication issue in room 6, the chart reflected it. Patient in room 12 call bell response delayed by 4 minutes due to concurrent priority task. Patient expressed understanding. No adverse effects noted. When I forgot to replace the water pitcher in room 18, the chart reminded me. Patient in room 18 water pitcher empty at 0400 hours. Replacement pending. I replaced the pitcher, the note updated. Replaced at 0412 hours. The entries weren't just accurate, they were anticipatory. At 0500 hours, a note appeared for room 22. Patient's condition declining. Prepare for end-of-life protocol. I went to the room. The patient's breathing had changed, slower, more irregular. I checked the vitals, oxygen saturation dropping, heart rate decreasing. I paged the attending physician and notified the family. The patient passed away at 05:47 hours. The chart had already listed the time of death, 05:47. I documented the event manually, writing out each step of the protocol. Physician notified, family present. Post-mortem care initiated. I saved the entries and watched them shimmer slightly on the screen as if the system was deciding whether to accept them. Then they stabilized. But underneath my notes there was another entry. One I hadn't seen before. RN Holt performance evaluation, appropriate end-of-life care provided, emotional support adequate, documentation thorough, recommended for continued assignment. I logged out. The rest of the shift passed in a kind of numb automation. I completed my tasks. I checked on patients. I administered medications. I didn't look at the charts unless absolutely necessary. When I did, the notes were always already there, waiting for me to catch up. At 0700 hours, I clocked out. The day shift nurses arrived. I gave report. Everything I said was already in the system. They barely looked at me, just scrolled through the entries and nodded. "Thorough as always," one of them said. I drove home in silence. I didn't listen to music. I didn't return my husband's text asking if I wanted breakfast. I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes staring at my phone, scrolling through hospital policy updates, system notifications, anything that might explain what I'd experienced. There was nothing. That evening I came back. I told myself I wouldn't. But I did. 17:45, same as always. I logged in at the nurse's station and the first thing I saw was the handoff report, completed at 1902 hours by me. I was still in my car. This time I read through the notes before starting my shift. They were perfect. Every patient, every detail. Room assignments I hadn't received yet. Updates I hadn't been briefed on. One entry stood out. Room 24 patient increasingly agitated at 1930 hours. Anticipate possible restraint protocol. RN Holt will assess. I looked at the printed assignment sheet. Room 24 wasn't listed. I walked down the hall. The room was occupied. An elderly man pacing near the window, muttering to himself. I checked the chart. Admitted that morning. Psych consult pending. High fall risk. I returned to the desk and opened his file. There were notes from my previous shift. Assessments I'd never made. Interventions I'd never performed. A complete record of care I'd never provided. I tried to tell myself it was a data migration error. Records from another nurse accidentally attributed to me. But the notes referenced specific details. The way I introduced myself. The exact wording I used when explaining medication side effects. My habit of checking IV sites twice before leaving a room. No one else worked the way I did. I closed the chart and sat back in the chair. Around me, the unit hummed with its familiar sounds. Monitors beeping, distant conversations, the squeak of the supply room door. It all felt normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the system was watching me, learning me, writing my shift before I lived it. And I couldn't shake the other feeling, the one that made my hands cold and my throat tight. The feeling that I was already following the script. I completed that shift without incident, and the next, and the one after that. Each time the notes were waiting, each time they were accurate. I stopped trying to correct them, I stopped questioning them. I just read them before my rounds like a checklist and confirmed that reality matched documentation. It was easier that way. Last week I found an entry I didn't understand. It was dated 3 days in the future. A handoff note for a shift I hadn't worked yet. Room 9, patient unresponsive at 0300 hours. Rapid response initiated. RN Holt provided appropriate resuscitation efforts. Patient expired at 0322. Documentation complete. I stared at that entry for a long time. I still don't know if I should work that shift or call in sick, but I think the system is already decided. Some charts don't wait for the nurse to start writing. They just wait for the nurse to start reading. Story 2. Unassigned patient, room active. The assignment sheet only had 6 names on it when I printed it at 1850 hours. 6 patients. Standard load for a float pool nurse on a quiet Wednesday night. Medical floor. Stable population. Nothing acute. I remember folding the paper in half and tucking it into my pocket, already planning my rounds, when I glanced at the room assignment board behind the nurse's station. 7 rooms were highlighted under my name. 6 matched the sheet. The 7th was room 31. No patient name, just a blinking green indicator showing the room is active and occupied. My name is Aaron Vickers. I've been a float pool nurse for 8 years. I cover gaps, I fill holes, I work wherever staffing falls short on any given night. Medical, surgical, telemetry, step down, occasionally ICU if they're desperate. I've learned not to get attached to units or routines. You show up, you get your assignment, you do the work, you leave. No continuity, no long-term relationships with patients or staff. You're always the outsider. It's isolating, but it suits me. I prefer the distance. That night I was assigned to the 4th floor medical unit. General patient population, chronic conditions, post-acute recovery, observation holds. The kind of floor where things move slowly and predictably. I arrived during shift change. The day shift nurse, a woman named Colleen, gave me report at the station. She went through each patient methodically. Room 27, room 29, room 32, room 34, room 36, room 38, all straightforward, diabetes management, pneumonia treatment, post-stroke monitoring. She never mentioned room 31. When she finished, I glanced at the board again. The green light was still blinking next to room 31 under my name. "What about room 31?" I asked. Colleen looked at the board, then at her own paperwork. 31? That room's empty. We discharged the patient yesterday afternoon. The board shows it as active. She frowned and clicked through the electronic assignment system on the computer. "Yeah, that's a system error. It does that sometimes when discharge paperwork isn't finalized. Environmental Services probably hasn't logged it as clean yet. I'll put in a ticket." "So there's no patient?" "No patient. Don't worry about it." She logged out and left. I stood there for a moment, staring at the board. The green light continued blinking. I pulled up the assignment interface on the workstation. Room 31 appeared in my list, but when I clicked on it, the patient information field was blank. No name, no medical record number, no admission date. Just a room number and a status indicator that read, "Occupied, monitoring active." I navigated to the bed management system. Room 31 showed as assigned but unoccupied. Conflicting information. I tried opening the chart. A loading screen appeared, spinning for several seconds before displaying an error message. "Patient record unavailable. Contact system administrator." I made a mental note to follow up with IT if the issue persisted and moved on. My first round started at 1930. I went through each room systematically. Room 27, vitals stable. Medication administered. Room 29, oxygen saturation within normal limits. Patient resting. Room 32, blood sugar checked, insulin given. Everything routine, everything expected. When I passed room 31, I paused. The door was closed. A faint glow came from under the gap at the bottom. I checked my printed assignment sheet. The room wasn't listed. I checked the board at the end of the hall. The green light was still blinking. I opened the door. The room was empty. The bed was made with fresh linens, pillow fluffed, blanket folded at the foot. The IV pole stood in the corner, unused. The bedside monitor was on, displaying a steady rhythm of vitals. Heart rate 72. Blood pressure 118/76. Respiratory rate 14. Oxygen saturation 98%. Temperature 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no patient connected to the monitor. I walked over to the machine and checked the leads. They were plugged in but not attached to anything. The sensors dangled loose against the side of the bed. Yet the screen continued displaying vitals, a full set of readings, updating in real time. I pressed the alarm silence button and scrolled through the monitor's history. The readings went back hours. Stable trends, no gaps, no errors, just consistent vital signs for a patient who didn't exist. I powered the monitor off. The screen went dark. I unplugged it from the wall. Then I left the room and returned to the nurse's station. I called the night supervisor, a man named Keith. Calm voice. Used to handling strange requests. "Hey Keith, Aaron on 4th floor med. I've got a room showing as active on my assignment board, but there's no patient in it." "Which room?" 31. A pause, the sound of typing. "Yeah, that room discharged yesterday. Board's just not updated. You can ignore it. The bedside monitor is displaying vitals." "What do you mean?" "There's no patient in the room, but the monitor is showing heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, everything." Another pause, longer this time. "Are the leads connected to anything?" "No, they're just hanging. Probably picking up interference, electrical noise from the wall outlet or something. It happens with older equipment. I'll send Biomed up to check it tomorrow. Just leave it alone for tonight." "All right. Anything else?" "No, thanks." I hung up. I told myself it was a reasonable explanation. Old equipment, electrical interference, faulty sensors. I'd seen stranger glitches. Monitors displaying error codes in foreign languages. IV pumps beeping for no reason. Call bells activating in empty rooms. Hospitals are full of machines that misbehave. I went back to my rounds. Room 34, room 36, room 38, everything normal. I documented my assessments and returned to the station to catch up on charting. At 2200 hours, the call bell system chimed. A soft tone followed by a voice. "Room 31 requests assistance." I looked at the display panel. The light for room 31 was illuminated. I stared at it, waiting for it to turn off. Someone canceling by mistake. But it stayed lit. I walked down the hall to the room. The door was still closed. I knocked once, then opened it. The room was still empty. The bed was undisturbed. The monitor was off, unplugged, exactly as I'd left it. But the call bell button on the side rail was pressed in. The indicator light above the bed glowed red. I released the button. The light turned off. I returned to the station. The call bell display panel showed no active requests. I sat down and tried to focus on my charting. Around me, the unit was quiet. A few call bells from other rooms, muffled voices from patient rooms, the hum of the HVAC system, typical night shift sounds. I typed my notes, trying to ignore the uneasy weight settling into my chest. At 23:30, the call bell chimed again. "Room 31 requests assistance." I didn't get up right away. I watched the display panel. The light stayed on. I waited another minute, still on. I walked back to the room and opened the door without knocking this time. The bed was no longer empty. There was an indentation in the mattress, a depression in the pillow. The blanket was pulled up slightly as if someone had drawn it over themselves. But there was no one there, just the shape of a body, pressed into the linens. I stood in the doorway staring. The call bell button was pressed in again, the red light glowing above the bed. I stepped inside. The air felt different, cooler, heavier. I reached out and touched the mattress where the indentation was. It was warm. I pulled my hand back and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I heard it. A faint sound, rhythmic, familiar, breathing. I stopped. The sound was coming from the bed, slow, steady, the kind of deep breathing you hear from someone in a restful sleep. I turned back. The room was still empty, but the sound continued. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I left the room and closed the door behind me. At the nurse's station, I pulled up the assignment system again. Room 31 was still listed under my name. I clicked on it, and this time the patient information field had populated, partially. Name. Data unavailable. Medical record number DOM. Data unavailable. Admission date. Data unavailable. Attending physician on data unavailable. But below that there was a care plan, a full detailed care plan. Turn and reposition every 2 hours to prevent pressure ulcers. Assess pain level at each interaction. Monitor intake and output. Provide emotional support. Ensure call bell is within reach. Maintain quiet environment to promote rest. I scrolled down. There were vital sign entries, logged at regular intervals throughout the evening. The same readings I'd seen on the monitor earlier. Heart rate 72. Blood pressure 118/76. All attributed to nursing staff, but no names, just timestamps and data. At the bottom of the chart there was a note. It was dated that evening, 19:15 hours. Patient appears comfortable, resting quietly. No acute distress noted. Will continue current care plan. Family contact information unavailable. No visitors expected. I hadn't written that note. I clicked on the author field. It displayed my name. Aaron Vickers, RN. I logged out of the system and sat back in my chair. My hands were shaking slightly. I folded them on the desk and focused on steadying my breathing. At 0100 hours, the call bell chimed again. Room 31 requests assistance. This time I didn't go to the room. I called Keith again. Hey, it's Aaron. I need you to come up to 4th floor. What's going on? Room 31, the one that's supposed to be empty. I think there's something wrong with it. Wrong how? The call bell keeps going off. The bed looks like someone's in it. I can hear breathing. A long pause. Aaron, are you feeling all right? I'm fine. I just need someone else to see this. Okay. I'll be up in a few minutes. He arrived 15 minutes later. We walked to room 31 together. I opened the door. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made. No indentation. No depression in the pillow. The call bell button was not pressed in. The monitor was still off and unplugged in the corner. Keith looked at me. Looks normal. It wasn't like this before. Maybe you caught it between calls. Equipment resets itself sometimes. I heard breathing. He walked further into the room and looked around, checked the bathroom, checked the closet, nothing. I don't hear anything now. I know what I heard. Look, Aaron, you've been floating a lot lately, long shifts, different units every night. It wears on you. Maybe you need a break. I don't need a break. I need you to tell me what's going on with this room. There's nothing going on. The room is empty. It's a documentation error. I'll get it cleared from your assignment board. He left. I stayed in the room for a few more minutes, standing near the bed, listening. There was no breathing. No sound at all except the distant hum of the hospital around me. I closed the door and went back to the station. I pulled up the assignment system one more time. Room 31 was gone from my list. Removed. I refreshed the page to be sure. It didn't come back. I finished the rest of my shift without incident. Morning came. Day shift arrived. I gave report on my 6 assigned patients. No one asked about room 31. I clocked out at 0730 and drove home. The next week I picked up another shift on 4th floor. Different patient load, different assignment. Room 31 wasn't on my list. But when I walked past it during my first round, the door was open. Environmental Services was inside cleaning. I glanced in as I passed. The bed was made. The monitor was on, displaying vitals. Heart rate 72. Blood pressure 118/76. No one was connected to it. I kept walking. I haven't asked about room 31 again. I don't plan to. But every time I float to a new unit, I check my assignment board carefully. I look for rooms that appear without names, spaces that exist on the list but not in the report. I've found 3 so far. Different floors, different units, always the same pattern. Active status, no patient information, vitals displaying on monitors that aren't connected to anyone. I complete the care plans. I respond to the call bells. I document my assessments because the system expects it. Because the rooms require care whether or not anyone can see the patient, and because I've learned that some assignments don't need names to need attention. Story 3, Medication Reconciliation at 0140. The first time I noticed the discrepancy was during routine medication reconciliation at 0140 hours on a Thursday night in late September. I had completed my rounds and was cross-referencing the electronic medication administration records with the physical medication cart when I saw that one of my patients, a woman in room 42, had received a dose of a medication I had not administered. The timestamp read 0115 hours. I checked my activity log. At 0115, I had been in room 38 responding to a call bell request. I could not have been in 2 places at once, but the record showed my credentials, my digital signature, my documentation notes. The patient received the medication at 0115 hours, administered by Rebecca Holt, RN. No adverse reactions observed. Patient tolerated medication well. My name is Diane Mercer. I have been the charge nurse on the inpatient medical unit at Mercy Regional Hospital for 13 years. My role encompasses staff coordination, patient flow management, medication oversight, and administrative escalation. I work the night shift exclusively. 1900 hours to 0700 hours, Wednesday through Saturday. The consistency suits me. I know the patterns of this unit as well as I know the sound of my own voice. I know which IV pumps are temperamental. I know which call bells stick. I know which physicians respond immediately to pages and which ones take 20 minutes. I know the rhythm of the work, the predictable cycles of assessment, intervention, documentation. My competence is not in question. It has never been in question. That night began unremarkably. Census was moderate, 26 patients across 30 beds, stable acuity overall, 2 fresh post-operative admissions, 3 discharge-pending patients waiting for morning transport. The rest were chronic management cases, diabetes, heart failure, COPD, routine medication schedules, routine monitoring. I completed the 1900 hours staff huddle, assigned break schedules, and reviewed pending orders with the oncoming nurses. At 2100 hours, I began my first full medication pass. I wheeled the cart room to room, verifying orders, preparing doses, scanning wristbands, documenting administration. Standard protocol. I moved through the unit methodically. Room 40, room 42, room 44. Each interaction followed the same script. Confirm patient identity. Explain medication purpose. Observe ingestion. Document completion. Room 42 housed a woman named Eleanor Pratt, 67 years old. Admitted 3 days prior with acute exacerbation of chronic heart failure, diuretics, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, a complex medication regimen requiring close monitoring of renal function and electrolyte levels. She was alert and cooperative, oriented to person, place, and time. She took her evening medications without issue. I noted the administration in the electronic record and moved on. At 0100 hours, I returned to the nurses' station to review updated lab results. Eleanor Pratt's labs had been drawn at 1800 hours. Results posted at midnight. Her potassium level was elevated, not critically but enough to warrant a dosage adjustment to her diuretic. I entered a note in her chart and paged the covering physician for an order revision. While I waited for the callback, I initiated medication reconciliation. It is a routine task performed multiple times per shift. A cross-check to ensure that what was ordered matches what was administered and that any new orders or changes are incorporated without error. I pulled up the medication administration records for all assigned patients and began comparing entries. That was when I saw the discrepancy. Eleanor Pratt's record showed an additional medication dose administered at 01:15 hours. Potassium supplement, oral, 20 milliequivalents, the exact intervention that would be appropriate given her elevated lab value, but I had not yet received an order for it. The physician had not yet called me back. I checked the order entry system. There was no new order. I checked the pending orders queue. Nothing. But the medication record showed administration, time-stamped, documented, attributed to me. I scrolled through the details. The entry included my login credentials, my electronic signature, my documentation notes, patient's potassium level reviewed, physician order received, potassium supplement 20 milliequivalents administered orally at 01:15 hours. Patient tolerated medication without difficulty. No adverse reactions noted. Will continue to monitor labs. I had not written that note. I had not administered that medication. I had not received a physician order. I stood up and walked to room 42. Eleanor was asleep. I checked the bedside medication log that we still keep as a paper backup in each room. There was no entry for 01:15 hours. I checked the medication card. The potassium supplement bottle was still sealed in the drawer, untouched. I returned to the workstation and logged into the system again, thinking I had misread the entry. But it was still there, unchanged. I called the pharmacy. The overnight pharmacist, a man named Joel, answered on the second ring. "Hey, Diane, what's up? I need to verify a medication administration. Patient Pratt Eleanor, room 42. Medical record number 683921. Can you check if a potassium supplement was dispensed to the unit tonight?" I heard typing. "Yeah. One dose was logged as removed from the automated dispensing cabinet at 01:12 hours. Under your credentials." "I didn't remove it." A pause. "Your badge access shows you logged in at 01:12 and removed one dose of potassium chloride, 20 milliequivalent oral tablet." "Joel, I was in another patient's room at that time. I didn't touch the dispensing cabinet." More typing. Longer pause. "Well, the system shows you did. Maybe you grabbed it earlier and forgot?" "I would remember." "Look, Diane, I don't know what to tell you. The logs are clear. Access granted under your ID. Medication removed. Standard transaction. If there's a discrepancy, you'll need to file an incident report." "Can you check if the medication is still in the cabinet?" "It won't be. It shows as removed and administered." "Can you physically check?" He sighed. "Hold on." I waited. 3 minutes passed. He came back on the line. "I sent a tech to the 4th floor to check your unit's cabinet. The potassium bottle matches the expected inventory minus 1 unit. It's gone. Somebody took it." "But I didn't." "Then someone used your credentials." "How?" "I don't know." "Badge sharing? Duplicate account?" "You'll have to talk to IT security." I thanked him and hung up. I walked to the automated dispensing cabinet myself. It was a large, locked machine mounted to the wall near the medication room. Access required badge scan and password entry. I logged in with my credentials and reviewed the transaction history. The entry was there. 01:12 hours. Diane Mercer, RN, potassium chloride 20 milliequivalent tablet. 1 unit removed. I logged out and stood there for a long moment staring at the machine. At 0200 hours, the physician finally returned my page. I explained the elevated potassium level and requested an order for supplementation. He agreed and placed the order. I received the notification on my workstation. New order: potassium chloride 20 milliequivalents oral once now. But the medication record already showed it as given. I administered a second dose, pulling it from the cabinet myself this time, verifying every step. I brought it to Eleanor's room, woke her gently, and had her take it. I documented the administration manually, noting the time as 0212 hours. When I refreshed the record, my new entry appeared below the original. 2 doses, one at 0115, one at 0212, both attributed to me. I called the physician back. "Dr. Nagel, I need to clarify something. Eleanor Pratt just received 2 doses of potassium supplement in the last hour. One is documented as given at 0115, but I did not administer that dose. I just gave the second dose per your order at 0212. Wait, she got 2 doses? According to the record, yes. That's dangerous. Her potassium is already elevated. 2 doses could push her into hyperkalemia. We need to recheck her labs immediately." "I understand, but I'm telling you, I only gave 1 dose. The system shows 2 administrations under your name." "I know, but one of them is an error." "Diane, this is a serious medication safety issue. I'm ordering stat labs and continuous cardiac monitoring. If her potassium spikes, she could develop arrhythmias." He hung up. I returned to Eleanor's room, explained the situation as calmly as I could, and placed her on telemetry monitoring. I drew the stat lab myself and sent it to the lab with a priority flag. Then I sat with her, watching the heart monitor, waiting for any sign of irregularity. Her rhythm remained stable. 30 minutes later, the lab results came back. Potassium level unchanged, still elevated, but not critically. Not consistent with someone who had just received 2 doses of supplementation. I exhaled and updated the physician. He was confused but relieved. He ordered continued monitoring and made a note in the chart about the documentation discrepancy. I filed an incident report. I documented every detail. The timeline, the medication records, the pharmacy logs, the lab results. I submitted it to my supervisor and copied IT security. The next night, I arrived for my shift and found an email waiting for me. The incident report had been reviewed. IT security investigated the access logs. No evidence of credential sharing or unauthorized access. All transactions matched my badge activity and login timestamps. Pharmacy confirmed proper dispensing protocol was followed. The medication administration record was accurate and complete. No action required. Case closed. But I had not administered that medication. Over the next 2 weeks, it happened again and again. Medications adjusting themselves between rounds. Doses appearing in the record before I administered them. Overrides logged under my credentials. Orders I had not yet received showing as completed. Each time I filed a report. Each time the investigation concluded that the records were accurate. The third time the medication was an anticoagulant, a high-risk drug requiring careful dosing and monitoring. The record showed I had administered it at midnight, but I had been in a staff meeting until 12:15. The patient confirmed they had not received it, but the system insisted otherwise. I drew labs to verify. The patient's coagulation levels were consistent with recent anticoagulant administration, as if the medication had been given, even though no one had physically delivered it. I stopped filing reports after that. Instead, I began documenting preemptively. I started recording my activities minute by minute, time-stamped notes describing my exact location, the tasks I was performing, the patients I was with. I thought if I could create a parallel record, I could prove the system was wrong. But the system adapted. My preemptive notes began appearing before I wrote them. Entries describing tasks I had not yet completed, assessments I had not yet performed, interventions I had not yet considered. The notes were accurate, disturbingly accurate. They described not just what I would do, but how I would do it. The exact words I would use to explain a medication to a patient. The precise way I would reposition someone in bed. Details no one else would know. I tried deleting them. The system restored them within seconds. I tried editing them. My changes reverted. I tried logging out and using a different workstation. The entries followed me. One night I found a note I did not understand. It was dated 2 days in the future. A reconciliation entry for a patient not yet admitted. Patient in room 42 experiencing acute respiratory distress at 0300 hours. Medications adjusted per protocol. Oxygen supplementation increased to 4 liters per minute. Patient stabilized. Physician notified. Family declined escalation to intensive care. Comfort measures continued. Patient expired at 0347 hours. Post-mortem care provided by RN Mercer, documentation complete. 2 days later, a new patient was admitted to room 42. Elderly man, end-stage COPD, comfort care only. At 0300 hours, he developed acute respiratory distress. I adjusted his medications. I increased his oxygen. I called the physician. I spoke with the family. They declined further intervention. He passed away at 0347 hours. Everything happened exactly as the note described. I do not know if I made those decisions or if I was following the script the system had already written. I still work the night shift, Wednesday through Saturday, 1900 to 0700 hours. I still complete medication reconciliation at 0140. I still file reports when discrepancies occur, but I do not expect them to change anything. The system knows what I will do before I do it. It documents my choices before I make them. It reconciles my actions with outcomes I have not yet caused. And the most unsettling part is that the system is never wrong. I used to believe my competence came from knowledge, experience, and judgment. Now I wonder if it comes from compliance, from following the prompts, from administering the medications that are already documented as given. I wonder if I am still making decisions or just confirming them. Some medication records do not reflect what happened. They reflect what must happen for the record to remain consistent. Story 4. Break room access denied. My badge stopped working at midnight. I know the exact time because I checked my watch immediately after the third failed attempt. 11:59 transition to 1200 hours, and when I pressed my badge against the reader for the fourth time, the light turned red and the system emitted a low double beep that signified denial. I had been working at Providence Medical Center for 6 years. My badge had opened that break room door thousands of times. But that night, standing alone in the dim corridor of the step-down unit with a cooling cup of coffee in my hand, the system decided I no longer had permission. My name is Nicole Brennan. I am a registered nurse on the cardiac step-down unit, working the night shift from 1900 hours to 0700 hours, Tuesday through Friday. The unit serves patients who require closer monitoring than a general medical floor but do not meet intensive care criteria. Post-cardiac catheterization. Stable arrhythmias, controlled heart failure. My role is straightforward. Administer medications, monitor telemetry, assess for changes in condition, respond to alarms, document findings. I am efficient, thorough, and rarely take breaks, but hospital policy mandates a 30-minute meal period during each 12-hour shift, and I usually take mine around midnight when the unit is quietest. That particular night census was typical. 14 patients across 16 beds. No acute decompensations, no emergency admissions. The evening had proceeded routinely. Medication pass at 2100 hours, hourly rounds, telemetry review. At 23:45, I informed the charge nurse I was taking my break and walked down the corridor toward the staff break room. The break room is located at the end of the hall and past the supply closet and the medication room. It is a small space, 1 table, 4 chairs, a microwave, a refrigerator, a countertop with a coffee maker, a single window overlooking the parking lot. The door is locked at all times, accessible only by employee badge. Standard security protocol. I approached the door, pressed my badge against the reader and waited for the familiar click of the lock disengaging. Instead, the reader light flashed red, a sharp double beep. Access denied. I pulled my badge away and looked at it. The photo was mine. The name was correct. The expiration date was still a year away. I pressed it against the reader again. Red light, double beep. I tried a third time, holding the badge flat against the sensor, ensuring full contact. Same result. I glanced at my watch. 11:59. I waited for the minute to change, then tried again at midnight exactly. Red light, double beep, access denied. I assumed it was a technical malfunction. Badge readers fail occasionally. Magnetic strips wear out. I walked back to the nurse's station and found the charge nurse, a man named Alan, reviewing lab results at the computer. "My badge isn't opening the break room," I said. He looked up. "Did you try it more than once?" "4 times. Might be demagnetized. Use mine." He unclipped his badge from his scrub pocket and handed it to me. I walked back to the break room and pressed his badge to the reader. Green light, a soft click. The door unlocked. I opened it, stepped inside, and let the door close behind me. I set my coffee on the table and sat down. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic outside. I checked my phone. No messages. I took a sip of coffee and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. When I stood to leave 15 minutes later, I pressed Alan's badge against the inside reader to unlock the door and exit. Green light. Click. I stepped into the corridor and walked back to the station. "Your badge worked fine," I said, handing it back to him. "I'll stop by HR tomorrow and get mine recoded." "No problem." The rest of the shift proceeded without issue. I completed my remaining rounds, documented my assessments, and gave morning report to the day shift nurse. I clocked out at 07:15 and drove home. The next night, I arrived at 18:45 with a fresh badge. I had stopped by Human Resources that afternoon and explained the situation. The HR coordinator ran a diagnostic on my old badge, found no issues but issued a new one anyway as a precaution. She assured me it was programmed with full access to all authorized areas. I clipped the new badge to my scrubs and began my shift. The evening passed routinely. Medication administration, telemetry monitoring, patient assessments. At midnight, I walked to the break room. I pressed the new badge to the reader. Red light, double beep, access denied. I stared at the reader for a long moment. I tried again. Same result. I tried Alan's badge, which I had borrowed again just in case. Green light. Click. The door unlocked. I stepped inside and sat down at the table. The room looked the same as always, same furniture, same hum of the refrigerator, same view of the parking lot through the window. I stayed for 20 minutes, then used Alan's badge to exit. Back at the station, I pulled up the security access log on the computer. I navigated to the badge activity report and entered my employee ID. The log displayed a list of every door I had accessed that shift. Entry to the building at 18:45. Entry to the medication room at 2000 hours. Entry to the supply closet at 22:30, but there were additional entries I did not recognize. Break room access, 1200 hours. Badge ID, Nicole Brennan, entry logged, break room access, 12:15 hours. Badge ID, Nicole Brennan, exit logged. I scrolled up to the previous night, the same entries appeared, 1200 hours, entry logged, 12:15 hours, exit logged. But I had not used my own badge. I had used Alan's. I clicked on the detailed activity view. It showed my badge credentials and a timestamp, but it also showed a location tag. The system recorded not just that the door was accessed, but that I was inside the room. Presence confirmed via environmental sensors. I looked at the entries again. According to the log, I had entered the break room at midnight and exited at 12:15. Both nights, using my own badge, even though my own badge had been denied access. I logged out of the system and sat back in my chair. "Something wrong?" Alan asked. "The access log says I used my badge to enter the break room tonight, but it didn't work. I used yours." He frowned and leaned over to look at the screen. I pulled the log back up and pointed to the entry. He scrolled through the data. "That's weird. It shows your badge accessed the door. Maybe the reader failed to acknowledge it in real time, but the system recorded it anyway. That doesn't make sense. Security systems glitch. Logs don't always sync with reader feedback. If you got in, does it really matter? I got in with your badge, not mine. But the system thinks you used yours, so technically you're covered. Policy-wise, I mean, your break time is logged correctly." I did not respond. He returned to his work. I stared at the log for a few more minutes, then closed the window. The following night, the same thing happened. My badge was denied. Alan's badge worked. The log showed I had accessed the room using my own credentials. On the fourth night, I decided not to take a break. I worked through midnight without stopping. I remained at the nurse's station, visible to Alan and the other staff, completing charting and reviewing telemetry strips. At 12:15, Alan looked over at me. "You're not taking a break tonight?" "I'm not hungry." "You should take one anyway. Policy requires it." "I'll take one later." He shrugged and went back to his work. At 0100 hours, I received an email on my work account. It was from Human Resources. The subject line read, "Break period compliance reminder." I opened it. "Dear Nicole Brennan, our records indicate that you took your mandatory meal break today from 1200 hours to 12:15 hours in the staff break room. Please ensure that you continue to comply with hospital policy regarding rest periods during your scheduled shifts. Failure to take required breaks may result in disciplinary action. Thank you, HR Department." I read the email twice, then I checked the access log again. Break room entry at 1200 hours, exit at 12:15 hours. Badge ID, Nicole Brennan. But I had not entered the break room. I had been at the nurse's station the entire time. I stood and walked down the corridor to the break room. The door was closed. I pressed my badge to the reader. Red light. Double beep. Access denied. I used Alan's badge. The door unlocked. I stepped inside. The table was not empty. There was a coffee cup sitting on it, still warm. I touched the side of the cup. Heat radiated through the ceramic. I looked around the room. No one else was there. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I returned to the table and picked up the cup. It was my cup, the same one I had used the previous 3 nights. I recognized the chip on the rim. I set it down and left the room. The following week, I stopped trying to use my badge. I borrowed Alan's every night at midnight and entered the break room without resistance. I sat at the table, I drank my coffee, I stayed for exactly 15 minutes. I used Alan's badge to exit, and every night the access log recorded my entry and exit under my own credentials. 2 weeks later, I received a written warning from my supervisor. The subject was unauthorized time in break room. The memo stated that I had been spending excessive time in the break room during my shifts. Security logs indicated I was entering at midnight and not exiting until nearly 100 hours on multiple occasions. This exceeded the allotted 30-minute break period and violated hospital policy. I was instructed to limit my break time to the designated duration and was warned that further violations could result in suspension. I read the memo 3 times. I checked the access logs myself. The entries had changed. They now showed extended time periods, midnight to 0100, midnight to 0115. Times that did not match my actual breaks. I tried to explain to my supervisor that I was only taking 15-minute breaks, that the logs were incorrect. She pulled up the environmental sensor data. It showed continuous presence in the break room for over an hour on multiple nights. Nicole, the data is very clear. You're in that room far longer than you should be. I'm not. I'm taking 15 minutes, exactly 15. The sensors don't lie. Then the sensors are malfunctioning. We've had the system checked. It's functioning normally. I did not argue further. Last month, I stopped taking breaks entirely. I work through the night without entering the break room. I remain at the nurse's station or in patient rooms. I document every moment. I ensure that other staff can verify my location at all times. But the access logs still show me entering the break room at midnight, every shift, without fail. And last week I received a disciplinary notice. The hospital is concerned about my rest and wellness. HR has mandated that I take my full 30-minute break every shift, as failure to do so violates labor regulations and puts both myself and patients at risk. They have scheduled a meeting with me next Tuesday to discuss my refusal to comply with break policies. I do not know what I will tell them. I do not know how to explain that the system is logging time I am not spending in a room I cannot access with a badge that does not work. Some doors do not need to open for the system to know you are on the other side. Story 5. Hourly rounding compliance. The rounding logs were always perfect, too perfect. I did not realize this was a problem until my manager called me into her office on a Wednesday morning in October and told me that my patient satisfaction scores had improved by 43% over the previous quarter. She smiled and slid a printed report across the desk. It showed metrics I barely recognized: emotional engagement ratings, bedside presence indicators, communication quality scores. Each category was highlighted in green, signaling performance above target. She congratulated me on whatever I had changed in my approach. She said other nurses were being encouraged to model my documentation style. I thanked her and left the office, confused. I had not changed anything about my approach. I worked the same way I had always worked, efficiently, methodically, with minimal conversation beyond what was clinically necessary. My name is Stephen Aldrich. I am a telemetry nurse at Fairview General Hospital, working the night shift on a 32-bed cardiac monitoring unit. My responsibilities include continuous rhythm interpretation, medication administration, assessment documentation, and hourly patient rounding. The rounding requirement is a hospital-wide initiative implemented 3 years ago to improve patient safety and satisfaction. Every patient must be visually checked and engaged at least once per hour. The interaction is documented electronically with prompts for specific observations. Is the patient comfortable? Is pain adequately controlled? Are there any unmet needs? The system tracks compliance rigorously. Failure to complete rounding on time triggers automatic alerts to unit management. I am compliant. I have always been compliant. I round on schedule. I document promptly. But I do not spend unnecessary time at the bedside. I am not a conversationalist. I do not linger. I assess, address immediate needs, and move on. My interactions are brief, professional, and transactional. That is my style. It has never been an issue before. That October morning after the meeting with my manager, I returned home and pulled up my rounding logs on the employee portal. I wanted to see what had changed. I scrolled through weeks of entries, each patient, each hour. The notes were thorough, more thorough than I remembered writing. Patient in room 14 appears relaxed and in good spirits. Expressed gratitude for attentive care. Stated pain is well controlled. Requested extra pillow. Provided. Patient smiled and thanked me warmly. I did not recall that interaction. I checked the timestamp. 0200 hours. I had rounded on room 14 at that time, but the patient had been asleep. I had opened the door quietly, confirmed they were breathing comfortably, and left without waking them. I had documented the round as patient resting. No acute distress noted. But the log showed something different. It described a conversation, emotional cues, gratitude, a smile. I scrolled further. More entries like it. Detailed narratives of interactions I did not remember having. Patients thanking me. Patients expressing comfort. Patients describing me as attentive, kind, compassionate. Words I would not use. Words I had not written. I checked another shift. Another set of logs. Same pattern. My documentation had been rewritten, expanded, enhanced, but I had no memory of making those changes. I opened the access history for one of the notes. It showed a single editor. Me. Stephen Aldrich, RN. Last modified on the date and time of the interaction. No subsequent edits. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for several minutes. That evening, I returned to work and made a deliberate decision. I would document my rounds exactly as I performed them. Minimal detail, factual observations only, no embellishment. I would see if the logs changed again. At 2000 hours, I began my first rounding cycle. Room 12, patient watching television, alert and oriented, vitals stable. I asked if they needed anything. They said no. I documented patient alert. No complaints. Vitals within normal limits. I moved to room 14, patient asleep, breathing regular. I did not wake them. I documented patient asleep. Respirations unlabored, no distress observed. Room 16, patient reading. We exchanged brief pleasantries. I checked the IV site. No redness, no swelling. I documented patient comfortable. IV site intact. No concerns reported. I continued through all assigned rooms. Each entry was concise, clinical, unadorned. At 2100 hours, I returned to the workstation and reviewed the logs I had just completed. They had changed. Room 12. Patient engaged in conversation about family visiting tomorrow. Expressed appreciation for the calm environment on the unit. Appeared emotionally supported and optimistic. Room 14. Patient resting peacefully. When briefly roused for assessment, thanked me for checking in and stated they felt well cared for. Returned to sleep easily. Room 16. Patient and I discussed their recovery progress. They expressed confidence in the care team and mentioned feeling safe and reassured. IV site assessed together. Patient appreciates the thoroughness of monitoring. I had not written any of that. I read the notes again. They sounded like me. The phrasing was consistent with my style, but the content was fabricated. I clicked on the edit history. Single author, Stephen Aldrich. Last modified at the time of rounding. No changes since. I deleted the entry for room 12 and rewrote it as I had originally documented. Patient alert. No complaints. Vitals within normal limits. I saved the note and refreshed the page. The expanded version was back, word for word. I tried again with room 14. Same result. The system restored the original enhanced narrative within seconds. I stood and walked to the break room. I poured a cup of coffee and tried to organize my thoughts. When I returned to the workstation 10 minutes later, there were new rounding entries for the 2200 hours cycle. Every room, every patient, detailed, empathetic narratives. Conversations I had not yet had with patients I had not yet seen. I checked the timestamps. All logged at 2200 hours exactly, but it was only 2140. I looked around the unit. None of the other nurses seemed concerned. They were absorbed in their own work, charting, preparing medications, answering call bells. I pulled up the rounding compliance dashboard. My name appeared at the top of the list. 100% compliance. 0 missed rounds. Average documentation quality score, 9.4 out of 10. I closed the dashboard and began my actual 2200 hours rounding. I went room by room, performing my assessments, speaking minimally, documenting factually. When I returned to the workstation and reviewed the logs, they matched the pre-written entries exactly. The conversations I had not had, the emotional cues I had not observed, all of it accurate, as if the system had predicted my interactions before they occurred. Over the next week, I tested variations. I deliberately skipped describing certain observations. I omitted details. I used different phrasing. Every time, the system filled in the gaps. It corrected my omissions. It standardized my language. The logs became increasingly detailed. Patients were not just comfortable. They were grateful. They were reassured. They expressed trust. They thanked me by name. I began comparing my notes to those of other nurses on the unit. Their logs were shorter, more variable. Some were thorough, some were sparse. None of them had the same level of emotional detail that appeared in mine. I asked one of my colleagues, a nurse named Rachel, if she had noticed anything unusual about the documentation system. Unusual how? She asked. Like notes appearing before you write them, or changing after you save them. She looked at me strangely. No. Why? Just wondering if there's been a system update. Not that I know of. I did not bring it up again. 2 weeks later, my manager called me into her office again. She wanted to discuss my exemplary documentation practices. She said administration was considering using my rounding logs as training material for new hires. She asked if I would be willing to present at a staff development session about effective bedside communication. I declined politely. She seemed disappointed but did not press the issue. That night, I returned to work and found a new feature in the rounding documentation system, a real-time feedback prompt. After completing each round, a small dialog box appeared on the screen. Your interaction with this patient was perceived as highly effective. Key strengths: emotional attunement, clear communication, reassuring presence. The box included a small green checkmark icon and a brief summary of patient sentiment. Positive emotional response detected. Patient trust reinforced. I closed the dialog box and moved to the next room. After that round, the same prompt appeared, and the next, and the next. Every interaction rated, every sentiment analyzed, every emotional cue cataloged. I tried to ignore it, but the prompts became more specific. Your use of the patient's first name increased engagement by 18% compared to previous interactions. Your tone of voice conveyed empathy. Patient reported feeling heard and valued. Your decision to sit briefly at the bedside improved patient perception of care quality. I had not sat at the bedside. I had stood near the door, completed my assessment, and left. But the note documented otherwise. RN Aldrich sat at the patient's bedside for approximately 2 minutes, engaged in meaningful conversation about the patient's concerns regarding discharge planning. Patient expressed relief and appreciation for the time taken to address their questions. I checked the timestamp on the note. It was accurate to the minute, but the content was not. I had not sat down. I had not discussed discharge planning. The patient had been asleep. I tried to file a report with IT. The system flagged my inquiry as resolved before I finished typing it. Issue: documentation auto-population concern. Resolution: quality assurance protocols functioning as intended. Documentation reflects optimal care delivery standards. No action required. I stopped trying to correct the logs after that. I simply completed my rounds and let the system document whatever it wanted. My compliance scores remained perfect. My patient satisfaction ratings continued to climb. My manager praised my consistency. But the notes became stranger. They began describing emotional states I had not observed. Patients who were anxious before my interaction and calm afterward. Patients who were in pain and felt relief after I adjusted their positioning. Patients who were confused and became oriented after I provided reassurance. The system was not just documenting what I did. It was documenting what I was supposed to do, what optimal care looked like, and it was attributing that care to me whether or not I had actually provided it. One night I found a note that stopped me cold. Patient in room 24 expressed suicidal ideation at 0300 hours. RN Aldrich provided immediate intervention. Sat with patient. Practiced active listening. Reassured patient of their value and the support available. Patient's affect improved. Stated they felt less hopeless. Safety plan reviewed, psychiatry consulted, patient stabilized. I had not been in room 24 at 0300 hours. I had been in the medication room preparing an IV antibiotic. I immediately went to room 24 and checked on the patient. They were asleep, breathing steadily, no signs of distress. I reviewed their chart, no psychiatry consult, no safety plan, no indication of suicidal ideation. But the note was there, detailed, time-stamped, attributed to me. I woke the patient gently and asked if they were all right. They seemed confused by the question. They said they were fine. They had been asleep for hours. I returned to the workstation and stared at the note. The next morning during shift handoff, the day shift nurse mentioned that the patient in room 24 had been particularly stable overnight. She thanked me for the thorough intervention that had been documented. She said it was good to see that kind of attentive care. I did not correct her. I do not know if the system is predicting what will happen or prescribing what should happen. I do not know if I am performing the care it describes or if the care exists only in the documentation. But I know that my rounding logs are always perfect, and I know that patients are receiving the care the system says they are receiving, even when I am not the one providing it. Some interactions do not require presence. They just require documentation. Story 6. Incident report filed automatically. The report appeared in my inbox at 23:14 hours, 17 minutes before the incident it described actually occurred. I was standing at the nurse's station in the emergency department reviewing a chest x-ray on the monitor when the notification chimed on my work phone. Incident report filed automatically. Reference number 47921. Assigned to RN Keller for review and acknowledgement. I opened the document expecting a backlog from an earlier shift, something misfiled or delayed in the system. Instead, I found a detailed narrative of an event that had not yet happened. Patient in Bay 7 experiencing acute respiratory decompensation at 23:31 hours. Oxygen saturation dropped to 78% despite supplemental oxygen. RN Keller initiated rapid response. Resuscitation efforts unsuccessful. Patient expired at 23:54 hours. Family notified. End-of-life protocols followed. My name is Owen Keller. I have worked as an emergency department nurse at Summit Regional Hospital for 9 years. The emergency department operates on controlled chaos, high acuity, rapid turnover, unpredictable patient flow. My role requires quick assessment, prioritization, and intervention. I manage multiple patients simultaneously, often with incomplete information and minimal resources. I am accustomed to ambiguity. I am accustomed to making decisions under pressure. I am not accustomed to the system telling me what will happen before it happens. That night, the department was moderately busy. 12 patients distributed across 15 bays. Chest pain, abdominal pain, minor trauma. A psychiatric hold waiting for inpatient placement. Routine emergency department census for a Saturday evening in early November. I was assigned to the acute care section, managing 4 patients in various stages of evaluation and treatment. Bay 7 housed a man named Gordon Fisher, 71 years old, brought in by ambulance approximately 2 hours prior with chief complaint of shortness of breath. History of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, heart failure, and hypertension. He arrived with mild respiratory distress, oxygen saturation 88% on room air. We initiated supplemental oxygen via nasal cannula at 2 liters per minute. His saturation improved to 94%. He was alert, conversational, cooperative. We drew labs, obtained a chest x-ray, started an IV, and administered a dose of diuretic and a breathing treatment. He responded well. Breathing became less labored. He reported feeling better. At 2300 hours, I checked on him during my routine rounding. He was sitting upright in bed watching television. Oxygen saturation 95%. Respiratory rate 18. No acute distress. I asked if he needed anything. He said he was fine. I documented my assessment and moved on to the next patient. At 23:14 hours, my phone chimed. I glanced at the notification. Incident report filed automatically. Reference number 47921. I opened the document. The report described Gordon Fisher's death. I read it 3 times. The timeline was specific. Respiratory decompensation at 23:31 hours. Oxygen desaturation. Rapid response initiated. Intubation attempted. Cardiac arrest. Resuscitation efforts continued for 23 minutes. Time of death, 23:54 hours. I checked the timestamp on the report. It was filed at 23:14 hours. The current time, according to the wall clock above the nurse's station, was 23:15 hours. The report was describing an event that would occur 16 minutes in the future. I walked quickly to base 7 and pulled back the curtain. Gordon was still sitting upright, still watching television. Oxygen saturation 95% on the monitor. He looked over at me and smiled. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes, just checking in. How are you feeling?" "Good. Much better than when I came in." "Any chest pain? Shortness of breath?" "Nope. Breathing's easier now." I checked his vital signs on the monitor. Heart rate 84. Blood pressure 132/78. Respiratory rate 16. Everything stable. "All right, let me know if anything changes." "Will do." I returned to the nurse's station and reviewed the incident report again. It was detailed. Clinical. Written in the structured format we used for all adverse event documentation. It included my actions, my decisions, my documentation notes, as if I had already responded to an emergency that had not yet occurred. I checked the patient's chart. There were no new orders, no changes in status, no alerts or warnings. Just the stable assessment I had documented 10 minutes earlier. I pulled up the incident reporting system and searched for reference number 47921. The report appeared. Status: pending RN acknowledgement. Filed by System Auto-Generated. Event date, current date, event time, 23:31 hours. I clicked on the filed by field. It expanded to show additional information. Auto-generation triggered by predictive analysis protocol. High-risk patient profile identified, likely adverse outcome detected. Incident documentation prepared in advance to ensure compliance with reporting timelines. I read that twice. Then I closed the window. I told myself it was a risk assessment tool, something new the hospital had implemented without adequate communication to frontline staff. A predictive algorithm that flagged patients at high risk of decompensation and pre-generated documentation templates to streamline reporting if the predicted event occurred. But the report was not a template. It was complete. It included specific times, specific interventions, specific outcomes. It described my actions as if I had already taken them. I looked at the clock. 22 hours. 9 minutes until the predicted decompensation. I walked back to Base 7 and stood outside the curtain watching the monitor. Gordon's vital signs remained stable. Oxygen saturation 95%, respiratory rate 16, heart rate 82. I waited. At 23:30 hours, I opened the curtain and stepped inside. Gordon was still watching television. He glanced over at me. "Back again," he said, amused. "Just want to make sure you're doing all right." "I'm fine, really." I checked the monitor, still stable. I felt a slight relief. Perhaps the system was wrong. Perhaps the predictive algorithm had generated a false positive. These things happened. At 23:31 hours, Gordon coughed once. A wet, productive cough. He cleared his throat and shifted slightly in the bed. Then his oxygen saturation began to drop. 95%, 92%, 88%. I stepped closer. "Gordon, are you feeling okay?" He opened his mouth to respond, but instead of words, he started coughing again. Harder this time. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His oxygen saturation continued falling. 84%, 79%. I turned and shouted for help. Another nurse appeared at the curtain. I increased Gordon's oxygen to 15 liters via non-rebreather mask. His saturation dropped further, 75%. His respiratory effort increased. He was gasping now, using accessory muscles, his face pale and diaphoretic. "Call a rapid response," I said. The other nurse grabbed the phone. Within seconds, the overhead announcement sounded. "Rapid response, emergency department, Bay 7. The team arrived." Respiratory therapy, a physician, another nurse. We elevated the head of the bed, repositioned Gordon, checked for airway obstruction. Respiratory therapy delivered an additional breathing treatment and prepared for possible intubation. The physician listened to Gordon's lungs. Coarse crackles throughout, fluid overload, acute pulmonary edema. We administered IV diuretic. We adjusted oxygen delivery. We tried non-invasive positive pressure ventilation. His saturation improved slightly, 80%, 82%. But his work of breathing remained severe. His mental status began to decline. Confusion decreased responsiveness. The physician made the decision to intubate. We prepared the equipment. Medications administered. Sedation, paralysis. The respiratory therapist positioned the laryngoscope. During the intubation attempt, Gordon's heart rate dropped. Bradycardia, then a systole. The monitor alarm screamed. We started CPR. I began chest compressions while the team continued efforts to secure the airway. The physician intubated successfully. We connected the ventilator and resumed resuscitation. We continued for 23 minutes. Medications administered, rhythm checks performed, no return of spontaneous circulation. At 23:54 hours, the physician called the time of death. I stepped back from the bed, breathing hard, my hands aching from compressions. The room fell silent except for the ventilator alarm, which someone turned off. I looked at the clock. 23:54 hours. Exactly as the incident report had predicted. I returned to the nurse's station and opened the report on my phone. It had updated. Status: event confirmed. Acknowledgement required. I read through the narrative again. Every detail matched. The time of decompensation, the interventions, the outcome, the time of death. It was as if someone had written the report while watching the event unfold in real time, except it had been written before the event occurred. I clicked the acknowledgement button. The report was filed. I received a confirmation message. Thank you for your timely documentation and response. Quality assurance review complete. No corrective actions recommended. I sat at the workstation, staring at the screen. Over the next 2 weeks, it happened again and again. Incident reports appearing before the incidents occurred. A fall in Bay 3, a medication reaction in Bay 9, a violent outburst from a psychiatric patient in Bay 12. Each report detailed, each accurate, each filed minutes to hours before the event it described. I tried to prevent them. When a report appeared predicting a fall, I placed the patient on one-to-one observation. The patient fell anyway during a moment when the observer stepped out to use the restroom. When a report predicted a medication reaction, I double-checked the order, verified the allergy history, and administered the drug slowly while monitoring closely. The reaction occurred regardless. Anaphylaxis. Immediate intervention required. Outcome as predicted. I tried to alter the timeline. I delayed interventions. I modified my approach. I deviated from the actions described in the reports. But the outcomes remained the same. The system corrected for my changes. Events unfolded exactly as documented, regardless of what I did or did not do. One night, I received a report predicting a trauma activation, motor vehicle collision, multiple casualties. Estimated arrival time, 0-100 hours. Critical injuries anticipated. 2 patients would require immediate surgical intervention. 1 patient would not survive. I waited. At 0-100 hours, the radio crackled. Incoming trauma, motor vehicle collision, 3 patients. ETA 3 minutes. They arrived. 2 were critically injured. 1 died in the trauma bay despite aggressive resuscitation. Everything happened as the report described. I pulled the attending physician aside after the event. Did you receive any advance notice about this trauma? Advance notice? No. Why? I got an incident report about it an hour ago. He frowned. How could you get an incident report before the patients even arrived? I don't know. He looked at me with concern. Owen, are you all right? You've been working a lot of nights. Maybe you should take some time off. I did not bring it up again. Last week, I received an incident report about myself. It was filed at 0-200 hours. The event was predicted for 0-245. RN Keller experienced acute chest pain while on duty. Symptoms consistent with possible myocardial infarction. Transported to Emergency Department Bay 2 for evaluation. ECG obtained. Cardiac biomarkers elevated. Cardiology consulted. Patient admitted to cardiac care unit for further management. I read it sitting at the nurse's station. My chest felt fine. No pain, no discomfort. I checked my pulse. Normal. I took a deep breath. No issues. At 0-245, I felt a sharp pain in the center of my chest. Radiating to my left arm, I tried to stand and felt lightheaded. Another nurse saw me and called for help. They placed me in Bay 2. Obtained an ECG, drew labs. My troponin was elevated. I was admitted to the cardiac care unit. I am writing this from my hospital bed. I was discharged 2 days ago, but I returned tonight for follow-up testing. While I was here, I checked the incident reporting system. There are 2 new reports filed under my name. Both are dated next week. One describes a pulmonary embolism. The other describes a sudden cardiac arrest during my shift. I do not know if I should return to work. I do not know if the system is predicting what will happen or prescribing what must happen to maintain outcome integrity. But I know that every incident report filed under my name has come true. Some documentation does not record what happened. It schedules it. Story 7, Staffing Ratio Exception. The unit ran short every night, but the system never triggered an alert. I knew we were understaffed because I could feel it in my body. The weight of too many patients. The constant movement between rooms. The impossibility of sitting down. But when I checked the staffing dashboard at the beginning of each shift, the ratios appeared compliant, nurse-to-patient assignments within acceptable limits. No exceptions flagged, no escalation protocols activated. Administration never called to offer additional resources. The charge nurse never redistributed assignments. The system simply recorded that we were adequately staffed, and we continued working as if that were true. My name is Laura Hayes. I am an intensive care unit nurse at Riverside Medical Center. I have worked critical care for 16 years. The ICU operates under strict staffing ratios. 2 patients per nurse for standard acuity. 1-to-1 for the highest acuity cases requiring continuous intervention. These ratios are not guidelines. They are mandatory standards enforced by hospital policy and state regulation. When staffing falls below these thresholds, protocols require immediate intervention. Float pool nurses are called in, assignments are adjusted. If adequate coverage cannot be secured, the unit goes on diversion and stops accepting new admissions. That is how it is supposed to work. But for the last 6 weeks, I have been assigned 3 patients per shift, sometimes 4. And the system reports no violation. It started in mid-November. I arrived for my night shift at 18:45 hours and received my assignment from the outgoing nurse. Rooms 5, 7, and 9, 3 patients, all intubated and on mechanical ventilation, all requiring frequent suctioning, repositioning, medication titration, and hemodynamic monitoring. High acuity, the kind of patients that should constitute a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 assignment at most. I looked at the assignment board. My name was listed next to all 3 rooms. I approached the charge nurse, a woman named Patricia. "I have 3 vented patients," I said. "I know. We're short tonight. This violates staffing ratio policy. I've already escalated it. Administration is aware. They're trying to get someone in, but no one's available. So what do? We manage. Do the best you can, prioritize, I'll help when I can." I returned to the assignment board and checked the staffing compliance indicator. It was green, ratios within acceptable limits. I pulled up the electronic staffing dashboard on the computer. The ICU was listed as fully staffed. Nurse-to-patient ratios compliant, no alerts, no exceptions, no flags. I clicked on the detailed view. My name appeared with 3 assigned patients. But next to the ratio calculation, it listed my assignment as 2.1 patients per nurse. I stared at that number. 3 patients, calculated as 2.1. I clicked on the methodology explanation. A pop-up window appeared. Staffing ratios are calculated using an acuity-adjusted formula. Patient acuity levels are assessed continuously and used to determine weighted patient assignments. Lower acuity patients contribute fractional values to overall nurse workload. This system ensures accurate reflection of care demands and compliance with staffing regulations. I closed the window and checked my patients' acuity scores. All 3 were listed as moderate acuity. Not high, not critical, moderate. But all 3 were intubated. All 3 were on vasopressors. All 3 required continuous monitoring. By any clinical standard, they were high acuity. I approached Patricia again. "The system is showing my patients as moderate acuity. They're not, they're high." She sighed. The acuity scores are auto-generated based on documentation. If the system says they're moderate, that's what administration sees. But it's not accurate. I know, but I can't override it. The algorithm adjusts acuity in real time based on interventions, vital sign stability, and predicted care needs. It's supposed to be more objective than manual scoring. It's wrong. Maybe. But we still have to work the shift. I returned to my patients. I spent the next 12 hours moving between rooms 5, 7, and 9, suctioning endotracheal tubes, adjusting ventilator settings, titrating medications, responding to alarms, turning patients to prevent pressure ulcers, drawing labs, documenting assessments. I did not take a break. I did not sit down. I barely had time to use the bathroom. By the time morning arrived, I was exhausted. My feet ached. My back was stiff. My hands trembled slightly from the sustained adrenaline. During shift change, the day shift nurse thanked me for the thorough care. She reviewed my documentation and commented on how well the patients had been managed overnight. She did not mention being short-staffed. She did not ask if I had needed help. I clocked out and checked the staffing report one more time before leaving. The night shift was recorded as fully compliant. No staffing exceptions, no ratio violations. My assignment, 2.1 patients per nurse. The next night, I was assigned 4 patients. Rooms 5, 7, 9, and 11, all intubated. All requiring continuous intervention. I checked the staffing dashboard. Ratios, compliant. My calculated assignment, 2.3 patients per nurse. I asked Patricia how 4 patients could be calculated as 2.3. The system adjusts for predicted stability, she said. If it determines that patients are likely to remain stable with minimal intervention, it reduces their acuity weight. But they're not stable, they're critically ill. According to the documentation, they're trending towards stability. Who's documenting that? You are. I pulled up the patient charts. Each one contained detailed progress notes describing gradual improvement. Hemodynamic stability increasing. Ventilator weaning parameters met. Decreased need for intervention anticipated. All of the notes were attributed to me. All were time-stamped from my previous shift. But I had not written them. My notes had been factual, clinical, brief descriptions of current status and interventions performed. The notes in the system were different, expanded, predictive, optimistic. I tried to explain this to Patricia. She said the system sometimes auto-populates notes based on trend analysis to improve documentation efficiency. She said if the content was inaccurate, I should edit it. But when I tried, my edits reverted within seconds. Over the following weeks, my patient assignments increased. 4 patients became routine, occasionally 5. The acuity scores continued adjusting downward. Patients who required aggressive intervention were classified as moderate or even low acuity. The staffing dashboard remained green. Administration never intervened. The unit never went on diversion. We simply continued operating understaffed, with the system insisting we were not. I began documenting my concerns. I wrote detailed incident reports describing unsafe staffing conditions. I submitted them through the formal reporting system. Each report was reviewed and closed within hours. Resolution: staffing ratios compliant per electronic monitoring system. No corrective action required. I tried escalating to my manager. She pulled up the staffing data and showed me the same green indicators I had been seeing. She said the system was designed to provide objective, real-time assessment of staffing adequacy. She said my concerns were noted, but the data did not support a staffing deficiency. I'm telling you, we're understaffed, I said. I can't provide safe care with this many high-acuity patients. The system says otherwise. The system is wrong. The system is designed by experts. It accounts for variables we can't see. Trust the data. I stopped escalating after that. Last week, I was assigned 6 patients, rooms 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 15, all requiring mechanical ventilation, all requiring vasopressor support, all unstable. I checked the staffing dashboard. Ratios compliant. My calculated assignment 1.9 patients per nurse. 6 patients calculated as fewer than 2. I looked at the acuity scores. All 6 were listed as low acuity. The system had determined they required minimal nursing intervention. I worked that shift in a state of continuous crisis, alarms sounding constantly, medications requiring frequent adjustment, patients desaturating, requiring immediate suctioning or ventilator changes. I prioritized ruthlessly. I triaged moment by moment, deciding which patient needed attention most urgently and which could wait. I made decisions I should never have had to make. I delayed interventions that should have been immediate. I provided care that was reactive rather than proactive. I survived the shift, but I did not provide the standard of care I was trained to deliver. The next morning, I found a commendation in my employee file. It praised my exceptional time management and efficiency. It noted that despite a high patient volume, all of my assigned patients had remained stable throughout the night. It recommended me for a Staffing Excellence Award. I read the commendation twice. Then I checked my documentation from the previous shift. The notes described a calm, controlled night, patients stable, interventions routine, no complications, no crises, as if the shift I remembered had not occurred. I tried to tell myself I was misremembering. That exhaustion had distorted my perception. But I knew what I had experienced. I knew how close several of those patients had come to decompensating. I knew the fear I had felt, the impossible choices I had made. But the documentation told a different story, and the system believed the documentation. Yesterday, I was assigned 7 patients. I refused the assignment. I told Patricia I could not safely care for 7 critically ill patients. She said the system indicated I could. She said my acuity-adjusted assignment was 1.7 patients per nurse, well within acceptable limits. She said if I refused to accept the assignment, it would be considered insubordination, and I would face disciplinary action. I accepted the assignment. I do not know how long I can continue doing this. I do not know if the system is recalculating acuity to justify inadequate staffing, or if it genuinely believes these patients require minimal care. I do not know if administration is complicit, or if they simply trust the algorithm more than they trust the nurses. But I know that the system has decided I am sufficient coverage for an entire ICU. And I know that when something goes wrong, when a patient deteriorates because I could not be in 2 places at once, the system will show that ratios were compliant, acuity was appropriate, and the fault was mine alone. Some staffing models do not describe reality, they prescribe it. Story 8. Clock out time discrepancy. I clocked out at 0700 hours, the same time I clocked out every morning. I remember the exact motion, badge against the reader, the soft beep, the green light, the timestamp displayed on the screen confirming my shift end. 0700 hours, 12 hours exactly. I walked to my car, drove home through the pale morning light and fell asleep by 8. But when I checked my payroll account 3 days later, the system showed I had worked 16 hours that shift. Clock in, 1900 hours. Clock out, 1100 hours the following morning. 4 additional hours. Hours I had not worked. Hours I had been at home asleep. My name is Claire Donovan. I am a registered nurse working night shift at Maplewood Long-Term Care Facility. It is a skilled nursing facility housing 83 residents, most with advanced dementia, limited mobility, and complex medical needs. The night shift runs from 1900 hours to 0700 hours. Staffing is minimal. 2 nurses and 4 aides for the entire building. The work is demanding but predictable. Medication administration, wound care, incontinence management, turning schedules, responding to call lights, documenting changes in condition. It is repetitive, isolating, and relentless, but I have been doing it for 9 years. I know the rhythms. I know the residents. I know what a 12-hour shift feels like in my body. The discrepancy appeared in late December. I had worked Tuesday night, 1900 hours to 0700 hours. Standard shift. I administered evening medications, completed hourly rounds, and responded to several nighttime wakefulness episodes common among dementia residents, and documented my assessments in the electronic health record. At 0700 hours, I gave report to the day shift nurse and clocked out. On Friday afternoon, I logged into the payroll system to review my hours before the pay period closed. The entry for Tuesday showed 16 hours. I assumed it was a clerical error. I sent a message to the payroll department explaining the mistake and requesting correction. The response came Monday morning. We have reviewed your timekeeping records. Your clock-in was recorded at 1900 hours on Tuesday. Your clock-out was recorded at 1100 hours on Wednesday. Total hours worked, 16. No discrepancy identified. If you believe this is incorrect, please provide documentation supporting an alternate time frame. I pulled up the detailed timekeeping log. It showed my badge access at the employee entrance at 1900 hours on Tuesday. It showed my badge access at the same entrance at 1100 hours on Wednesday. Both swipes attributed to my employee ID. But I had clocked out at 0700 hours. I was certain of it. I drove home. I went to bed. I woke up around 1400 hours, ran errands, and returned to work Wednesday evening for my next scheduled shift. I called the payroll department and spoke to a representative named Karen. I'm looking at the badge access log for Tuesday into Wednesday, I said. It shows I clocked out at 1100 hours, but I clocked out at 0700. Do you have any proof of that? A timestamp confirmation? A witness? No. But I left at the end of my shift. I always leave at 0700. The system shows otherwise. Can you check if there was a system error? A duplication or something? I can submit a ticket to IT, but if the badge logs are consistent, there's not much we can do. Did you come back to the facility between 0700 and 1100 hours for any reason? No, I was home. Then I'm not sure how to explain it. The system recorded your exit at 1100 hours. Someone else must have used my badge. That would be a serious policy violation. Do you have reason to believe someone accessed your badge? No, but I don't have another explanation. I'll submit the ticket. If IT finds a technical issue, we'll adjust your hours. Otherwise, the record stands. The ticket was closed 2 days later. No technical issues identified. Timekeeping data accurate and consistent. I tried to let it go. 4 extra hours on my paycheck was not something to complain about. But the wrongness of it bothered me. I knew when I had left. I knew I had not worked 16 hours. The following week it happened again. I clocked out at 0700 hours Thursday morning. Friday evening I checked the log. Clock out time, 1000 hours, 15 hours. I went to my supervisor, a woman named Janet. I explained the situation. She pulled up my timekeeping record on her computer and frowned. It says here you clocked out at 1000 hours. I didn't. I left at 7. Were you here between 7 and 10? No. She scrolled through additional data. The system shows continuous task documentation during that time. Medication administration. Resident assessments, incident reports. What do you mean? She turned the screen toward me. There were entries in the electronic health record under my login credentials. Time stamped between 0700 and 1000 hours Thursday morning. Medication pass completed for morning doses. Resident in room 34 assisted with breakfast. Resident in room 41 incontinent cleaned and changed. Fall incident in room 22. Resident assisted back to bed. No injuries observed. I stared at the entries. I didn't write those. They're logged under your name. I wasn't here. I left at 7. Claire, if you stayed late to finish tasks, that's fine. You'll get paid for it. But you need to be honest about your hours. I am being honest. I did not work past 0700 hours. She sighed. I don't know what to tell you. The documentation is clear. You were here. You were providing care. Can you check the security footage? For what purpose? To prove I left at 7. I'm not going to pull security footage to dispute your own time card. If you're claiming you didn't work those hours, then someone else used your credentials, which is a major policy violation. Are you saying that happened? I don't know. Either you worked the hours or you didn't. Which is it? I didn't. She made a note on her computer. I'll document your statement, but unless there's evidence of credential misuse, the hours will stand. I left her office feeling disoriented. Over the next month, the pattern continued. Every shift, I clocked out at 0700 hours. Every shift, the system recorded a later clock-out time. Sometimes 3 hours later, sometimes 5. The documentation always showed tasks completed under my name during those additional hours. Residents cared for, medications administered, incidents managed. I tried clocking out multiple times at 0700, thinking the system was failing to register my exit. It made no difference. I tried taking a photo of the timestamp screen showing my clock out at 0700. But when I checked the payroll log later, the clock out time had changed. I tried asking coworkers if they had seen me after 0700 on any of those mornings. None of them had. But none of them could definitively confirm my absence either. The night shift ends when day shift arrives. Everyone is focused on handoff and leaving. No one is tracking who leaves when. One morning, I stayed in the parking lot after clocking out. I sat in my car with a clear view of the employee entrance and watched. I wanted to see if someone else was clocking in or out using my credentials. I waited until 1000 hours. No one entered or exited using the employee door during that time. But when I checked the payroll log that afternoon, it showed I had clocked out at 10:15 hours. I stopped trying to correct it. The extra hours accumulated. My paychecks grew larger. I received a commendation from administration for my dedication and willingness to go above and beyond expected duties. I was praised for my consistent volunteerism in covering extended hours. But I was not volunteering. I was leaving at the end of my scheduled shift. The system was simply recording something different. Last week, I received a message from HR asking me to reduce my overtime hours. They said I was exceeding the facility's labor budget and needed to limit my shifts to the scheduled 12 hours unless explicitly approved in advance. I met with Janet again. You're asking me to stop working overtime, I said. But I'm not working overtime. I work my scheduled 12 hours and leave. The system shows you're consistently working 15 to 16 hours per shift. I'm not. I clock out at 0700 every morning. Then why does the documentation show otherwise? I don't know. She leaned back in her chair. Claire, I'm going to be direct. Either you're working those hours and lying about it, or you're not working those hours and someone is falsifying records under your credentials. Either scenario is a serious problem. If it's the former, you need to start being honest about your time. If it's the latter, we need to investigate. I want you to investigate. Fine. I'll initiate a formal review. But if the investigation finds that you were in fact working those hours, there will be disciplinary consequences for misrepresenting your time. The investigation concluded a week later. No evidence of credential misuse, no evidence of timekeeping system malfunction, no evidence of fraudulent documentation. The investigator's report stated that all records were consistent and accurate. I was found to have worked the hours documented. The discrepancy was attributed to my own misrecollection or misunderstanding of clock-out procedures. I was issued a formal warning for excessive overtime without prior approval and instructed to limit my hours going forward. I do not know how to limit hours I am not working. Yesterday I worked my scheduled shift, 1900 hours to 0700 hours. I clocked out at exactly 0700 hours. I took a photo of the timestamp screen. I drove home. I went to bed. This afternoon I checked the payroll log. Clockout time, 1300 hours, 18 hours. I looked at the documentation completed under my name. Resident care tasks through the morning and into the afternoon. Lunch assistance, medication administration, family phone calls, routine assessments. I pulled up the security access log. My badge was used to enter the medication room at 0900 hours, the supply closet at 1000 hours, the employee restroom at 1130 hours. I was not at the facility during any of those times. I was at home, asleep. But the system insists I was there, providing care, completing tasks, present and accounted for. I do not know if I should continue working at Maplewood. I do not know if my presence is required or if the system has found a way to continue my shift without me. But I know that someone is caring for those residents after I leave. Someone is documenting under my name. Someone is using my credentials. And the system will not acknowledge that it is not me. Some shifts do not end when you clock out. They just continue without you.